To add an extra dimension and an extra complication to tests, tests can be either one or two-sided. What do I mean by this? So I need you to be able to distinguish between the two types. And if you remember, when we're looking at the normal distribution and you're looking at outliers, you can consider that strange values can lie at either end of the distribution. So that means we were looking at the weirdest 5% of data that was 1.96 standard deviations below the mean or above the mean. So that's two-sided. It means that the difference can go in either direction, and that's the standard way that we do hypothesis testing and the standard way we think about data and outliers. But in reality, when you're doing a treatment and you're doing a control, you expect the treatment to change the properties, the outcome variable, in one direction. You don't expect that if you've got a blood pressure reducing drug, it can possibly increase the blood pressure or decrease the blood pressure. It should be decreasing. So that means you can consider a one-sided test. So if you do a one-sided test, instead of the 5% most extreme values being at both ends of the distribution, you move them all to one end of the distribution, which means instead of needing to be 1.96 standard deviations above or below the distribution, you can move closer to the mean. That means you can be 1.6 or something like that standard deviations below the mean or above the mean if you're having a one-sided test, by moving all of that density, all of that 5% to one end. So the normal distribution thresholds, that was for 2.5% on either side. What you're doing is moving all that 5% to one side. So the two-sided tail looks like this. You see the 1.96 standard deviations above and below, 2.5% or 0.025 as a fraction of the area of 1, the probability of 0.025 of being in each of those blue areas, making a total of 0.05. But for one-tailed, you move it all to one side. So that means the 0.05 is all in one direction. So now, the number of standard deviations you either have to be above or below, depending on which direction your test is 1.645 standard deviations. Now, unfortunately, SPSS does not have a button you can click to say, I want to do a one-tailed test instead of a two-tailed test. So what it will do is calculate the p-value for the two-tailed test. So you either have to change the threshold that you want it to be low to 0.1, which is the same as having 0.05 at either end, or you halve the p-value that is reported by SPSS. Either way, you then compare it to the 0.05 or 0.01 to see if you're significant.